What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Double Coverage, the premier NFL podcast of the Gin Sports Network. I'm John J. II here with Robert Rachow, our NFL expert. Robert, how you doing today, buddy?
Good, man. Good to be back. Good to be back.
Yeah, it's good. I'm glad to have you back. We're getting into the season here through week 2. There's a lot that's gone on. Some lackluster performances, some breakout performances from teams that you might have not expected to see, and there's a lot of tumultuous events taking place, especially in the world of fantasy, which we're going to dive into all that and more here tonight. And I guess, what's your take as far as the NFL has transpired through week 2? What are your opening takeaways, I guess, just through week 2?
A lot of surprise teams this year. I mean, who would have put the Vikings at 2-0 with Sam Darnold? I mean, that was a shocker. I mean, we saw the Saints take down the Cowboys. Kirk Cousins is starting to get in a groove with the Falcons.
Yeah, what a
Um,
hell of a game that was, huh?
yeah, no kidding. And so I think the landscape of the playoffs is going to look a lot different this year than it was last year. So it'll be interesting to see like who's the real teams and who's the phonies out there.
So how many weeks have to go by before you can really make that judgment as far as who is legit and who is a fraud? What week is the threshold to make that deciding factor?
For me, it's like the midpoint of the season. Like a lot of teams get off to like a really hot start and then just fizzle out down the stretch, or vice versa. They usually come out slow and then start winning a bunch of games. Like the Bengals start 0-2 almost every year and then seem to find a groove at some point. Um, so yeah, like midpoint of the season is usually when I judge it, but you never know. I mean, they could start off undefeated and then just lose every game after that. So you can't be all in on somebody. You never know in the NFL. It's hard to win games.
Yeah, that's true. It really is hard to win games consistently with injuries and different things happening throughout the season, things off the field that affect the team chemistry and the structure of the team itself. So there's a lot to look at and a lot to take into account before you can really decide who's legit and who's a fraud. And we're going to talk about that here later too. And there's some glaringly obvious teams that are in one camp or the other as far as being legit or being fraudulent.
Yep.
So I guess let's just talk about injuries right now. So the IR list is it's growing week by week, day by day, and injuries have really been a factor. They're always a factor. We're always talking about injuries, but usually it's not this early. We're not talking about injuries and teams being plagued by injuries. And a lot of these injuries happen in the preseason, which I was talking to Moneric about.
Yeah.
So how have injuries really hurt teams and also affected a lot of fantasy managers teams and decisions they make off waiver wires, trades, etc., because they've been playing a significant role this year for sure.
Yeah, on the fantasy side of things, I mean, yeah, it's brutal. Week 2, you got a bunch of key players down. Christian McCaffrey's down, and you got guys like Pacheco for Kansas City going out. So, yeah, there's been a lot of injuries, and yeah, maybe the game's just getting faster. Players getting stronger, but I think a lot of it too is the fields they play on. I mean, they've done a lot of studies now saying that like the turf is really impacting. Like certain turfs are more likely to cause lower extremity injuries. And there's been some petitions the last couple of years to get some of these fields changed out, like the Lions being included. And yeah, I'm surprised like that wasn't something they made a move on this offseason because that was getting a lot of attention. Um, but it's disappointing. I mean, it's bad for the game when a lot of your star players are out, and it's definitely bad for fantasy owners when you're going into week 3 with a couple of your key pieces down.
Right, because you're having, especially for fantasy, you're forced to either pick someone up that you don't really want off the waivers, or you got to make a trade and lose a guy or two or more if you have to. I mean, you're really getting desperate. You might have to lose more than that. Take out some key players from your bench that you've been counting on as your backups. But now those backup levies, those reserves have ran dry quicker than expected. And I talked to you before the show here how I drafted Jordan Love and I drafted Tua as my fail-safe. And through week 2, I'm basically grasping at
Oh, man.
straws. So I'm really hurting over here. But I speak for a lot of people and I essentially, Musa sent a screenshot of his team. He has multiple players out, and he said, "I'm cooked. I'm cooked." And it's hard to say that right now in week 2 when you got so many games to play. But looking at the big picture, it's like you're really counting on some guys, mostly backup guys, second, third string guys, to pull the weight of the entire team. And it's a struggle, it's a battle, but we must persevere, and everyone's dealing with it. So that's kind of the solace that we can find in that reality. But
Yeah.
nevertheless, we have to deal with it. I want to talk about Aaron Rodgers. So is Aaron Rodgers the real deal? Is he the real deal? Obviously, 1-1 Jets. He's played through a couple of games. Lost to the 49ers, and they beat the Titans in somewhat of a convincing win. I think you can call that a convincing win, especially if you're Aaron Rodgers. He's happy about it. He's poised in press conferences talking about his stature and his how he feels following the game. Takes a couple hits, and he always is going to, but he's getting up there in age. He's been the grandfather of quarterbacks in the NFL for some time now. So how do you think he will fare against these newer players, these younger players? And do you think he can still play at the highest level regardless of his age and some injuries that he's taken in the past?
Yeah, if they can keep him upright and his offensive line keeps him healthy, I mean, he can do everything he's done in his career so far. We saw that with Brady. We saw that with Manning late in their careers, like well past their prime, still playing some good ball. So yeah, I mean, I think he's got a shot as long as he can stay healthy. That he's going to be at least in the middle of the road on passing stats, and I think he'll give his team a good shot to win some playoff games because I mean they've been almost a really good team with their defense, but their offense has just been missing that quarterback piece for so long that as a Jets fan out there, I'm sure they're happy they finally have at least somebody competent at the quarterback spot that can deliver some nice passes downfield because they got some playmakers, man. Garrett Wilson and some of those guys. They brought over Lazard from the Packers, and
Yeah.
they got Brees Hall. So they got some weapons. Um, do I think they're legit? I think they're probably 500 team is what I'm thinking, but um, you never know. That defense won them some games last year on its own. So yeah, anything's possible, and a lot of these quarterbacks are playing well into their 40s now. So I think he's got a shot.
Yeah, I think he does too. Obviously, in Robert Saleh, he's got to have some faith in the grandfather himself, in Aaron Rodgers, to have him as his quarterback. With quarterbacks somewhat becoming scarce in the fantasy leagues for sure, but also in the NFL as a whole, in the real game, he trusts him to deliver, trusts him to get the job done, and to utilize those weapons to the best of his ability. If he didn't, he wouldn't be playing them. So you can see that faith that Robert Saleh has in his quarterback. And I think if you can let those weapons find their full potential and really let them execute on the field, then you're going to have a solid team. But it's protecting the quarterback first and foremost, and also allowing Aaron Rodgers to perform at the highest level, regardless of his age, regardless of anything that he's gone through physically, ailments, etc., in his past, to persevere and become a prominent quarterback and bring the Jets to an over 500 season, maybe even a playoff bound team. So too early to tell. Too early to tell. But it's looking like it could be done. And I don't think
Yep.
he'd be playing if he didn't think that he could play at the highest level. He'd be hanging it up, as we've seen Brady do. But you mentioned Brady. That was an interesting anecdote there, and it's very true that he played well beyond his prime and played at the highest level beyond his prime. There's been some rumors. I gotta let you know about this. So obviously, Tua Tagovailoa, Miami Dolphins, they're out of a quarterback. They're kind of hurting. They're grasping at straws a little bit. And some people have said that maybe Brady could be coming back. And I know he's been itching. He's been talking about it. He's been hinting towards it. And everyone that's seen his commentary can see from a mile away that he's just not really fitting in like a glove as a commentator. You can tell he's not really, and maybe he is enjoying it. Maybe he's having a good time. Maybe he's doing his best. But I feel that he is just itching to get back on that field, very similar to Bill Belichick. And they worked very well as a duo for many years and acquired many rings in their tenure together. And you mentioned Belichick and Brady. I think they're both itching to get back on the gridiron. What's your take on Brady? You think that could ever happen, or you think that's crazy?
No, I mean he seemed pretty sincere on his last video that he made about his retirement. Like he seemed pretty sincere, and he's like, "I'm not coming back this time." I mean, he came back for the last season and seemingly regretted it. So I don't think he's coming back. And plus, his contract to be a commentator is so large, and he doesn't have to get hit. He doesn't have to go through training camp or preseason or nothing. He just has to show up and commentate and gets paid millions of dollars to do it. So to me, that's a dream job. So I would take that in a heartbeat over, getting run down by, the Bosas of the world. So,
Yeah.
but
Yep. I mean, it is a sweetheart of a deal. I think it'd be really hard to turn that down, from just a viewer's perspective. So I think you're right. I think he'll be comfortable where he's at and he'll grow into the commentating role. He just
yeah,
has to love it. He has to find his niche and be like, and realize, and a lot of players have done this that have left the league or, left it. Smiley Kaufman is one that comes to mind. And he's had some injuries plaguing him in the game of golf, which he's became a commentator full time and seems to love it. So I think he just has to find his groove, find that comfortability factor, and really grow into his new position, his new role as a commentator. And I think he'll be fine. But what about Belichick? You think Belichick's got a future in the NFL anytime in the future?
I think it'd be more in like an administrative role, like some sort of outside counsel or management in the building, kind of like Tom Coughlin did for a little while there. I don't know if he's
Yeah.
still a team manager or anything, but I think it'd be something along those lines. But I think he's probably done as a coach. I think the game's kind of passed him by. Like it really showed his last couple seasons where they were just not competitive, and he kept running that bum Mac Jones out on the field, and he's just stinking it up all over the place. So I don't know. I think he's probably done as a coach, but he might come back as a some administrative role somewhere.
Yeah, I could see that too. You mentioned Daniel Jones. I mean, is there any hope for Daniel Jones? I know there was a lot of promise for him last season. Obviously, not as much this season. And the Giants just seem like they are almost doomed from the start. But I could be wrong in that assumption. But I just haven't seen any poise out of this, Giants offense. They got some weapons, but
Yeah, they
is
shouldn't
Daniel?
have paid him.
Yeah, is Daniel Jones the quarterback though? Does
No,
he have what it takes to be the quarterback?
no. I mean, when you're on a breakaway run that couple seasons ago, where he's on a breakaway run, like 80-yard touchdown, and the turf monster tackles him, I think he's just not the guy. I mean, he's one of them people that you could plug in as like a competent backup somewhere, but I don't think he's a starter caliber quarterback. And it just shows every year. I mean, his stats are trash. Like he throws like 20 touchdowns a year and just as many interceptions sometimes. So I don't know. I think they shouldn't have paid him. The one or two good years he did have was more like scheme based. Like he was like a system quarterback, I guess I would say. Um, but yeah, he's not good. He's not good.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really want to be the guy that said it, but just from what I've seen, it doesn't look like he's that good, and definitely doesn't deserve to be a starting quarterback with how he's played. But
No.
nevertheless, he's still retained that starting spot.
Yeah, I'd go scoop up, Tannehill or somebody before I ran him out of there. So
Yeah, I mean, something's got to change over there in New York for the Giants to be good again. But I just don't think Daniel Jones is it. And
yeah, well,
hearing you say that just confirms it.
yeah. When they gave their running back away for a bag of Lay's potato chips, I mean that didn't help the situation either, man. I mean, and then he goes out and is doing pretty well for the Eagles. Now, granted, he had that drop last week, so they were probably pretty happy about that.
Right.
Um, but overall, I mean, he's doing pretty well on his new team.
Yeah, I
So
agree. All right, let's talk about the Cowboys. So we're gonna do a little bit of back and forth, kind of with different teams. We're doing different stuff, trying different things out, looking at the league as a from a bird's eye view, which we like to do over here. The Dallas Cowboys obviously just re-signed Dak Prescott. I think he's in the sack with Jerry Jones in Jerry's world, and he's kind of part of the Dallas empire at this point. Dak Prescott
yeah,
is. They don't look like they're looking for a new quarterback. They don't look like they're looking for a younger quarterback, someone to bring and revive the youth in Dallas. And I don't know. Does he still have what it takes to be somewhat good? We've talked about quarterbacks and different players that show us strength and show us success in flashes only. Um, does he have a solid future to bring Dallas a championship run, a Super Bowl run? Do they have a chance? Is there any chance in hell that these guys could do that? We haven't seen it happen yet. We've seen somewhat of a playoff run, but I keep posting the image of Dak Prescott looking up at the jumbotron, and it says on the subtitle, "Dallas Cowboys eliminated from
Yeah,
playoff contention."
seems
So,
like a broken record that just replays every year.
and I'm going to post it here after this podcast. So, what
But
do you
yeah,
think
I
about
mean,
Dak Prescott?
yeah, I don't think he's the guy either. I mean, he's a lot better than guys like Daniel Jones. Obviously, like his stats are. If you just looked at his stats only, he's like top 10 quarterback easily in the league every year. But when you go and watch games that matter, he just doesn't show up. He doesn't show up in big games, and I don't know. He just can't get his team over the hump. They always have a decent amount of weapons. They got CeeDee Lamb, and they usually have a good tight end group, and a couple good running backs this year. Maybe not as much, but um, they always have a good defense. It just seems like one of those teams that's always been like good, but not good enough to win. Kind of like the Chargers were for so
Yep.
long. Like the Chargers are always in the mix. They'd always are like 500 or above. Just fringe playoff team, or they make the playoffs, but then you just get sacked in the first round. Um, but yeah, I don't know. They're like one of the better regular season teams, but when it comes to playoff time, like they just haven't showed up. Um,
Right.
so we'll see. But yeah, I mean, how many chances are you gonna give Dak Prescott before he can produce some wins? I mean, he's one of them guys that hasn't shown it yet to me, at least. He reminds me a lot of Tony Romo, really. Like, if you look at
Yeah.
Tony Romo, stat wise, the guy was great. Like, stat wise, every year he was top 10, top 15. And then you go and look at his play in the playoffs or big games, like, and he just makes this huge mistake or just does something that contributes to the loss instead of helping contribute for a win. So
Yeah, Tony Romo, I think, would fall in the category of another guy that's in the sack or was in the sack with Jerry Jones. And I think anything that happens in the head office is going to have to be signed off by Jerry Jones. If Jerry Jones doesn't like you, you could be the best player in the league. You're not going to play. You're not going to play for Dallas. You're not going to wear the star on the helmet. And that's just kind of the way it is. Regardless of what the coaches feel about it, regardless of what the offensive coordinators feel about it, you're not going to play for Dallas. And that's kind of that's the be all end all with the situation. And whether that's sad or not, it's kind of out of everyone's hands, and they got to deal with what they have. And it's not to say that Dallas is a bad team, like you said, but I just never thought that they were good enough either to, like you said, get over that hump and find yourself in a position where you have a serious chance to make a Super Bowl run or at least a berth. Make at
yeah,
least get a berth.
yeah, and they bill them as a Super Bowl team too every year. So I mean,
Yeah.
that doesn't help the situation when everyone's like, "Yeah, Super Bowl," and then every year they just get eliminated in the first round. it's,
Yeah.
it's tough to watch when you see like they always have a lot of talent and then they just can't get over the hump. But as somebody that's never liked the Cowboys, I'll eat some popcorn to that. So
Yeah. Right. Me too. I don't know if you remember this, Robert, but last year when the Lions played Dallas, I did a big trolling post where I wore a Dallas Cowboys crew neck, and I posted it, and I'm like,
yep,
let's
yep.
go Cowboys. I was like, how about them Cowboys? And I posted after they beat the Lions, and I didn't get a lot of love out of that, but I did it anyway, and I don't know. I just it's just one of those things that I did. And I want to see. I guess I don't want to see Dallas do great, but at the same time, so many people have seen them, watched them, and I'd say they could share a lot with Lions fans, even though I think it might burn a little bit more for Dallas fans because they've been there, they've been so close, they've been in the playoffs, but they just can't find that extra level, that upper echelon of their game to make it to the point where they're going to really have a serious opportunity to win a Super Bowl. But they
Yep.
still keep bringing back the same tools in the tool shed, and
Yeah.
they expect different results.
Yep.
So
Exactly. Well
we'll have
put.
to,
Well put.
yeah, we'll have to see what they do. You brought up something important in the pre-show, and we were talking about this earlier. No bell cow backs. speak to that a little bit more. Tell me what you mean about that, because I thought and I think you're going to resonate with a lot of football fans in general, but also fantasy managers, just in how this has affected the modern game. What is this
Yeah.
concept, and what's that all about? How does it affect the game?
Yeah, you go back 15, 20 years and like every team had their running back, their face of the franchise player, the Emmett Smiths, the Barry Sanders, even going back a little ways, even just Derrick Henry's probably one of the last backs I view as like a bell cow guy where they're going to get 25, 30 touches a game. You don't even know who their backup is, they're just the guy. And from a fantasy perspective, that was great. Like, all right, you knew what you're getting when you drafted somebody. And now everyone's doing like a running back by committee. Like the Lions is a perfect example that, they have Gibbs and Montgomery, and you never know which guy's going to tote the load for the week, who's going to pop off and have a bunch of yards and touchdowns. Um, from a fantasy side, it's really tough. Like every year, it seems like I draft the wrong running backs just from that reason alone. Like there's just not the teams anymore that have the one guy. There's a few exceptions. Obviously, like Christian McCaffrey when he's healthy, like he's getting the rock, 20 plus times. But um, yeah, it's just a different league now, and I think they kind of went to that just because they want to keep guys healthy for the playoffs. And plus, like we were talking about earlier, just all the injuries now. Like everyone's just running backs, like the toughest position injury wise. Like you're just running straight into 300 plus pound linemen and linebackers all the time. I mean, it's pretty tough to stay healthy at that position. So now that they have like a committee set up for most teams, they have guys that are not going well over on their workload for the year, and that way playoff time they're good to go. And but yeah, some teams are breaking the mold, like the Chargers. With Harbaugh now, I mean, they just gave J.K. Dobbins like 30 carries or 25 carries last week or whatever it was. It was a lot.
That's
So
right. That's true.
yeah, so some coaches are trying to bring it back, but it's an interesting landscape right now. And as a fan, it's cool. Like you get to see a lot more players at the position, but as a fantasy owner, it's tough. It's definitely a tough spot.
Yeah, it's tempting, but not feasible to draft the two quarterbacks, because it's really a back and forth type of position nowadays. Draft the two quarterbacks that predominantly touch the ball for the same team. It sounds crazy to do, but one of those guys is going to pop off. And chances are, if you have two from the separate team, a different team, Kenneth Walker the third is a perfect example. He is one of those guys that might not get as many touches per game. Didn't even play last week because I think he had a quad injury or oblique, something like that, some kind of injury. So he
Mhm.
didn't play. But you talk about guys that are going to get touches, but you just don't know how many, how few and far between they're going to be. And a lot of guys are situational running backs too. So you got to punch it in. You're in the red zone. You're going to probably be running with a certain guy compared to the other guy. A power
Yep.
back, somewhat of a full, modern day fullback, which you got to bring that somewhat back too. That's kind of gone to the wayside, I think, in a large way. But seeing that happen, and it really does, like you said, make it tough for managers to pick one and hope and pray they're going to get 20 plus touches a game, because there's really no guarantees in the modern game for that to happen with any team, any franchise, given the injuries, given the potential for success. And it's a formula that I haven't really seen anyone in the modern game, at least this season, be able to crack the code on. But we'll have to wait and see how that plays out, if that remains the constant going forward into week 3 and beyond, or if things change. You mentioned Christian McCaffrey, and we talked about injuries a little bit earlier. With Deebo Samuel now being out, how does that affect the offense for the 49ers? Because you look at Deebo Samuel, and I can't really pick out of a hat very many people like Deebo Samuel. He's very much a multi-tool. He's the Swiss Army knife of the 49ers offense. How is that going to affect the 49ers as a whole?
Yeah, it's definitely going to affect him, but he's been one of those guys that he's been injured a lot in his career, so they've found out how to win without him. So I'm more concerned of like, I mean, even though that their backup, I think his name's Mason, has been doing pretty well.
Yep, yep.
McCaffrey just brings that X factor to the game that once they got him, it just felt like, all right, now they're a Super Bowl contender. And maybe that's going to get him over the hump. But now he's injured. It's kind of a tough spot to be. You're putting a lot on, Brock Purdy now because now you don't have that X factor at running back. Still got a good running back, but and then not having one of your top receivers too. That's a tough spot to be. I think they'll recover. They're one of those teams that they can create a lot with just scheme. We kind of saw it against the Lions and in the postseason. They came out of the halftime and just out schemed the Lions and just got guys wide open. And next thing you know, guys that we didn't even know were on their roster are just making huge plays. So
Yeah.
it was tough as a Lions fan, but you got to respect the game from the Niners and the offense that they're able to run even without some of their biggest players.
Yeah, they're very diverse and they're very adaptable to any situation they're thrown in. And I would argue they're still a Super Bowl contending team without their weapons, some of their best weapons. But they're going to have to pick up the pieces a little bit. And it's going to be interesting to see how they do that, as a lot of teams are in that same position. Injuries have basically been on the headlines everywhere in every NFL tabloid that I've been looking at. It's taking over essentially. And you look at the different rules, and I haven't talked to you about this yet, but the new kickoff rules aimed to mitigate a lot of these injuries. Obviously, you can't do that, and can't really affect. Nothing really affected the just basic play style of first down, second down, and beyond, and how that's all set up. But I guess, do you think that new kickoff rule did any good to the game as far as protecting players, or do you think it really didn't do much?
Protecting players, sure, I'm sure it's helped. But as far as making the game entertaining, like definitely is kind of a dud so far because the way the rules are set up now is that you have to kick it within a certain zone or it's a penalty, so everyone just boots it into the end zone. So now you're getting even less kick returns than you were last year. So I think they're going to change the rule again and either like bump up the the touchback another 5 yards to make it less likely they're just going to boot it into the end zone, which is crazy because I mean we just go back a few years and the touchback was at the 20 and then it's at the 25. Now it's at the 30. I mean, when's it going to stop? They're going to be at the 50-yard line soon. I mean, I
Right.
know they're trying to get the offenses going, but I don't think that's the way you do it. And I don't know if you heard about like the onside kicks and how they changed that. Like
Yeah.
they made it to where you have to announce you're doing an onside kick and you can't do them till you're like losing in the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
I'm like, what is going on? Like, I mean, hardly any teams onside kick anyway. So why are we? I mean, why are you taking the surprise like fun aspect out of it?
Right.
Um,
That was even more of a travesty, I think, to the game of football and the NFL game, more than the kickoff base kickoff rule, with the landing zones, and with having all your players 20, 30 yards in front of the kicker and all this stuff. But you notice everything that's transpired, there's flaws and there's issues and there's holes with everything that has happened, and you can see them continuing to happen with every new rule. And you just mentioned another set of new rules that's going to happen to bring this back to a somewhat normal kickoff scheme, special teams play, however you want to classify it. But it really sheds light on the fact that you can't fix something that's not broken. And I think they try to do that even going back, like you said, a couple years from when the
yeah,
original touchback was 20 at the 20. And now you're talking, the 25, then now you're at the 30. You can only go so far, before that there's really no kickoffs at all. And that could even be the case at some point.
yeah.
But I guess, do you think there's any possibility, any chance in the world that they would go back to the original rule?
I don't think they're ever going to go back to the original. I think they're just going to keep tweaking what they have now. Um, the kickoff is a violent play, right? I mean, you got men running full speed at each other, but they know the risks too, right? I mean, everyone knows the risk when they step onto the field. So
Yep.
I don't know. Maybe to me, that's something you let the players decide. Like that's something like you ask the NFLPA. What do you guys want? Do you want old school kick return or do you want the new? Here's the data. I'm sure they're going to have a bunch of data now on injuries, and let the NFLPA make that choice.
Right.
And,
And yeah.
yeah, if the
Well, like
players
you,
want it, they want.
exactly. Players want it, they want it, regardless of what the big heads say about it. And that takes all the responsibility and all the decision making out of out of the whole scheme of things for the higher ups, the guys that are really signing off on this and voting on these rules changes, because that's what the players want. That's what the players should get. They know what they're getting themselves into, and they're strapping on the pads, they're putting the helmet on, strapping up their chin straps. They know the risks involved, and that's the reality of the situation. How do you think? Okay, how do you think the injuries that have happened that have already transpired this year? Do you think they will be taken into account when they make these? Take look at these metrics. Are the overall amount of injuries taken into account for kickoff stuff? When even maybe a lot of these injuries didn't occur on kickoff. These are just
Yeah.
happening in the game throughout the game. Does that get taken into account when they're making rules changes? And will those metrics affect future rules changes for, let's just say, the kickoff?
Yeah, I think so. I think they're going to use all that data they collect to make some decisions. I think obviously with the new kickoff, the injuries is going to go way down. But what they need to do is they need to tweak the rule to where there's actually some returns, because the way it is now, I just boot it into the end zone every time. Like, I haven't seen hardly any kick returns this year. Maybe
I
just
don't
in the
know if I've
games.
seen any. I don't think
Yeah,
I've seen any.
yeah, touchback. I mean, we're just watching a kicker boot it into the end zone. It's like you were saying, it's almost become pointless now, to where they should just start at the 30-yard line and call it a
Yeah,
day.
right.
Um, so I think they just need to tweak it and tweak it to where it makes sense, to where you're actually going to get some returns. It seems like they pulled that from what, the USFL or the XFL.
Yeah, something like that.
Seemed like it worked fine there. Seemed like they actually had some good kick returns when I was watching those games. Um, so I don't know what they need to change, but they definitely need to do some tweaks on it for sure.
Yeah, I mean, just watching an NFL game compared to watching a college football game in this day and age, I'm excited to watch a kickoff when I'm watching college, but
Yep.
when I'm watching NFL, it's like, oh man, just give them the ball at the 30. It's
Here we
like,
go
why?
again.
What's the point? You got
Yep.
guys that you kick it in the end zone or do whatever, they still got to run all the way to the end zone to run from the 45 or whatever, wherever the hell they're at. And it's just like, what is the point? What is the point? We're just basically running a drill. This is a it's almost like a simulation play. It's a warm up to get
Yeah,
these guys.
formality.
Yeah, it's a formality, right? And it's kind of becoming redundant. I hope a lot of people are taking this into account, watching this, dissecting the metrics, dissecting how it's affecting not only the players and the game itself, but how it's affecting the viewership of the game, because I think it's seriously affecting it in a negative way. But will they do anything about it? I think you brought up a great point to give it and put it in the hands of the Players Association and see what they do with it. See what you get back. See what kind of information you get, because that could only help the situation and help the game overall.
I mean, my as a fan, like, my buy-in would be more if I was hearing that the players are who's driving it, but knowing it's just probably coming from some bigwigs in the NFL. Yeah, I mean, I'm not really sold on it yet, so I'm hoping to see some changes there soon.
Yeah, me too. All right, let's finish off with the Detroit Lions. Detroit Lions won pride. Obviously, took it on the nose last week to Baker Mayfield's Bucks, previously dubbed Cleveland's Clown, before he made some changes himself to his jersey. But what do you think about the modern Lions? Obviously, I talked a lot of trash about the Lions in the preseason, and I will probably continue to do so, just to bring the trolls out of the trenches, bring them out from under the bridge, because I want to see who they are, and defend your team. Defend your team. I know you're a devout Detroit Lions fan, as many people are in our Discord and our community. What do you think about the Lions, and how do you think this loss will help them for the better?
Yeah, I mean, they didn't pretty much all their starters didn't play at all in the preseason, which is becoming more common just because of the whole injury side of things. So you're seeing a lot of teams get off to slow starts on offense, and the Lions are one of those teams. I think it's a lot. I mean, you got the play calling, you got Goff's not playing his best game. I mean, his last game was probably the worst that he's played as a Lion. So you hope that he's going to improve, but there's a lot of positives. I mean, Hutchinson had 4.5 sacks, right? I mean, that was cool to see.
Yep.
Um, they moved the ball. I think Goff had over 300 yards passing, but no touchdowns and 2 picks is pretty tough. I mean, on one of the picks, the receiver got mugged and they didn't throw the PI, but hard to make excuses. Hard to make excuses, and you got to be able to come back from that. And then of course, like right before the half, with the whole running the field goal team on, and then no, get back to the sideline, and the clock, they end up getting a penalty, which ran the clock out, which really cost them the game because if they'd have kicked a field goal there, they would have only needed to kick a field goal at the end of the game when they
Yep.
had the ball back with like 40 seconds. So really, I mean, the loss is just as much on the coach as it is the team, which he owned that, right? I mean, he's not one to shy away from the adversity, and
No.
they're a resilient team. Like we've seen them when they only got a couple wins, his first year, and they've just grown every year. So I think that teams have figured out some of their plays now a little bit, like the style offense they want to run, but also they're kind of getting away from what they do best. You look back at the '90s Cowboys, you knew what they were going to run, right? I mean, it was like running up the middle with Emmitt Smith and then play action pass to Irvin or whoever else, and I mean, they were just running the same offense, but try and stop us kind of attitude.
Yeah.
So I feel like they need a little bit of swagger back, and need to go back to the offense that got them to the cusp of Super Bowl last year, which is just pounding the rock. I mean, I want to see Montgomery and Gibbs have like a combined 35 touches, plus a game, and yeah, we didn't really see that. So kind of a weird start for the Lions, but now they got to play a good Arizona team that just got off, to a hot start. Which
Yeah.
another one of those teams, like, are they legit or not? Time will tell, but they're definitely hot right now. So good luck to the Lions corners trying to defend Marvin Harrison Jr. That's all I got to say.
Yeah, no kidding. He's gonna be something special here in the league. I can only assume. But yeah, just to my only take on the whole thing with the loss is get your losses in early. If you're gonna be playing for a playoff spot, playing for a deep playoff run, get your losses early, make those adjustments early, and that way you don't have to be playing on pins and needles and eventually become to the point where if you're winning games and you become 5-0, you could find yourself playing scared football, which is nothing you want to do.
Yeah.
So I think this could help the Lions. Obviously, Lions fans are optimistic going forward that they'll make the proper adjustments, but only time will tell, and we'll have to see the true test against the Arizona Cardinals this weekend. But I guess let's just have a rapid fire round. What are your teams that you think are legit right now through week 2?
Well, even though the Lions are 1-1, I'd put them. They're still legit, man. I know a lot of people are panicking right now. They're definitely a good team. Um, and the NFC, it's really tough because some of your best teams now have a bunch of injuries, like the Niners. Um, the Eagles looked like they had some of their key players make some big mistakes in a big game. I guess another NFC team, I'd be looking at as a potential like wild card, be like the Falcons.
Yeah,
After that huge win, like Kirk Cousins, if he can play that good, I mean, he looked good, man. Like a whole 40, 50 second, last seconds of the game, he was just dealing, throwing dots all over the field. So, um, they could be legit. AFC, it's hard to tell. I mean, it's hard to bet against the Chiefs, right?
yeah,
Um, I've never been a Lamar Jackson fan, so I think he's always going to be holding that team back a little bit. Like, seems like big plays that he always misses in big games. Like he missed the last couple throws of the game. Uh, for that week 1 against the Chiefs. Um,
Would you put
but
Would you
yeah,
put Baltimore in the fraudulent category?
I think they're one of those good like regular season teams, right? That they're bound to make their way into the playoffs usually, but once they get to the playoffs, Lamar Jackson's stats are just abysmal. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, like he's probably negative touchdown to INT ratio in the playoffs, which is not where you want to be. So you look back at like some of the best QB runs in the playoffs to win a Super Bowl. You look at like Matthew Stafford had like 10 touchdowns, 3 picks. Flacco, he went 11 for 0, in his
yeah,
playoff run.
Joe Flacco.
So
Oh yeah.
yeah, he needs to have some playoff run like that to be able to cement himself as a legit player. I mean, he won an MVP, but um, yeah, I mean, you can't disappear in big games like that. But yeah, it's hard to pick like good teams and bad teams after 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I
I
would
gave you
be
a
like,
loaded question. I gave you a loaded question. I
yeah, I
didn't.
mean, I'm not going to stamp my name on some of these teams after 2 weeks,
Oh, I know you're careful to do
uh,
that.
but yeah, I mean, especially with the injuries, like you were talking about. I mean, it all circles back to that because some of these teams just lost their best players, and now they're going to try to figure out a new identity, new offense, new defense. Um, so time will tell. But yeah, I would definitely wouldn't place any hardcore bets right now. I'd wait like at least a few weeks before uh, you got some dark horse picks for the Super Bowl.
Right. We'll have to circle back with you week 5, post
There
week
you go.
5, and we'll see if we got a better idea come that point in the season. So we'll see what happens at that point. But that brings us to the end. You got any final words, final thoughts for the people before we sign off here?
No, man, just everybody have a great week. Enjoy the game, and yeah, I hope everybody has a good week. Stay healthy, and go Lions. Go
That's
Lions.
right. That's right. Make sure to check us out on social media, everybody. Everything, all of our links are in the bottom of this podcast. Check us out on our website, ginsportsnetwork.com, and follow us on IG at Gin Sports Network. And we look forward to connecting with you guys on there. This has been Double Coverage, the premier NFL podcast of the Gin Sports Network. I'm your host, John J. II, here with Robert Rachow. Have a great night.